Yeah, so I'm Zach. I've been working with the Mesh for, I don't know, about 6 years or so. And one of the things that I do is work on the supernodes, among other things. But the supernodes, well, before I get to the next part of it, as a background for the presentation, the supernodes are basically how we get internet from donated internet connections. We have firewalls and routers and so forth that take that and give it to the antennas, so then downstream nodes can use it, right? So it's a critical part of the mesh because it enables us to do everything else that happens in the mesh. And providing and having them and doing a good job will speak to sort of the thing that Daniel was talking about having diversity and not depending on any one location, any one provider, and so forth. So I'm going to talk about a new one. We're calling it Supernode 10. You can call it a point of presence. You can use whatever fancy word you like. It's 111 8th Avenue. So just as one more background before going into this, these presentations are a bit backwards because, which is okay, because this location is what connects, this 111 8th Avenue is what connects this building that you're in now. And so keep that in mind when we hear the next presentation about the size and shape of this building that we're in now. Okay, so 111 what? What does that mean? Why should you ever know this address, and why is it something that sounds interesting, right? It's a building on 15th and 8th. It's a full city block. It's just shy of 3 million square feet, so it's huge. And it's bigger than the Empire State Building on its side. It has a rooftop helipad. Who cares, right? It has a truck-size freight elevators. It has like 14 of them, and it has 182 internet carriers in it. So it's one of the most connected buildings in Manhattan. Most of internet traffic goes through there somehow eventually. In 2010, Google bought the building for about $2 billion because it's such an important internet hub that they wanted to own it and be part of it. They also happen to have a lot of offices there, so this just shows the magnitude of how critical it is. Moreover, here's a quote from Wikipedia. During the Northeast blackout of 2003, the building was able to keep power on because it has 37 generators, right? It's a crazy infrastructure building that we are now part of as well. It's a giant data center. That's what it is, that all this nonsense is trying to tell you. It looks like that. Not really, but it actually does look like that is. That is a picture from that building from some time ago. It also does look like this on the ceilings. There are wires all over the building. These are not from me. They're from the Wired magazine credits. So yes, why did we choose this location? Well, we have a matrix here of, we made this some time ago, of just different locations that are in, I guess it's off a little bit. It's where the Y's are just below it, so my apologies. But these are different data centers, and these are different people that we want to connect with, or people who have offered to give us internet connectivity for the community. And so by choosing one of the buildings that is maybe expensive, but allows us to connect to everybody we want to, it really can make it so that we can consume all of the bandwidth that's possible to be donated to us. So it's an important location, and as New Yorkers, we know location, 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 right? This is an important thing. That's why some of us get apartments that are too expensive in the right neighborhood, because you want to go to the coffee shop that you want down the street, right? And so this is sort of the same thing, but with the internet carrier version of that. It allows us to grow in the future. So up until this point, for better or worse, maybe it's embarrassing for us to say, we haven't had a lot of redundancy in our network. Yes, it's a mesh. It fails over between different antennas and different nodes. It's very redundant in that aspect. But once you get to the internet portion of it, you either go out through Manhattan or you go out through Brooklyn. And if one of them goes down, you have to reroute across the whole mesh, go the other way, and then go back out. You can't really jump between them. We also don't really have more than one connection at either location. And so it's not a great situation. We need to solve this somehow. Moreover, with the way that we have it set up now, even if we were able to go between those two sites directly with a fiber or something, it's not really very easy to share the bandwidth. So for example, on the left here, you see we have Supernode 1 with 1 gigabit of internet. And on the right, we have Supernode 3 with 40 gigabits. Well, for some time, we actually had more bandwidth going out of Supernode 1 than Supernode 3, just because the balance of who was on which side was more shifted towards the Manhattan side. It's a little bit different now, but we can't really share the bandwidth very well across these two sites. So goals that we should look for in the future, and that's why we're doing this site, is We want to get more upstream bandwidth from donors who want to donate it to us. We also want to use that bandwidth better, because if we get it and we don't use it well, there's no point in having it. It doesn't help anybody in the mesh. And using it better means smoother for members, better failover and redundancy when there are problems on the internet or when we have problems, better access to internet resources. You know, you take the shortest path to Netflix that you can rather than having to go through a complicated path, because that's what's available in your neighborhood. And we also want to be able to hook up fiber connections like this location without having to redo the entire world every time we want to connect something. Okay? So we've created, or we are creating, the NYC Mesh backbone network, which is just another portion of the mesh, but it's mostly going to be fiber. Why? Because of the reasons I just mentioned, but more specifically, most of the buildings that have antennas or where we can get internet don't have antennas, or they aren't really good antenna locations for the mesh in general. There's only a handful of these data centers that really would serve us appropriately. And so bringing internet to the people purely with antennas on data centers doesn't scale very well. And it's not going to let us do a good job to help the members. So we essentially need to create our own internet, our own section of the internet, in order to serve ourselves, which is the members, right? So that's kind of what we're doing. This diagram is kind of an interesting thing I threw together today. On the left and right, we have a bad antenna location versus a good antenna location. And on the up and down axis, the vertical axis, we have good connectivity versus bad connectivity. And so you can see that locations like Grand Street, Rivington, PH, Morrisania, they're all really good antenna locations. They're super tall, and they're really nice locations for us. They serve a lot of people in neighborhoods that we haven't served before, but they have poor connectivity. And if you look at some of our existing supernodes, supernode 1, 375 Pearl, and number 3, they're good antenna locations, sort of, but they have okay connectivity. And then you look at like 111 8th Avenue, it has the best connectivity, but it's a horrible antenna location. And so what we need to do is we need to merge the really great connectivity locations with the really great antenna locations. And so the way to do that is to have, for example, fiber optics between those sites, build our own backbone, and connect them together, right? So that's the premise of the whole thing. It's kind of a standard practice to do that. So we'll just move on. So we're going to move from this, where we have kind of independent sites that are connected through the mesh, to something more like this, where we have multiple locations. We can take multiple upstream internets, and we can connect them all to different neighborhoods, either one-off or redundant, and then have all the mesh behind it. And so you can see there's a lot of ways that we can make it more redundant. This is the ultimate goal, and we have portions of this already up and running. All right? So what we have at this building is the epitome of this concept that we're doing. So at 111 8th Avenue, we have half a rack, which is twice our Supernode 1 space. We have 40 amps of power, which is 2.5 times the Supernode 1 space. So it's really boosting us up quite a bit. We have a bunch of cross connects to the Meet Me room, which is way more than we can ask for at somewhere else. We now have 40 gigabits of internet, so as much as in SN3, we have that all again. So now we have 81 gigabits of internet for the mesh recently. We've just been offered a 10 gig internet exchange connection, so that's 10x what we were offered 5 years ago. And we have a bunch of Juniper switches from an anonymous donor. And of course, dark fiber to this location, and more to come. The benefits over Supernode 1, it's bigger, it's better. We're not stuck with just one connection. We have access to the Meet Me room and so forth. It's also been a big challenge to get more than 1 gigabit out of Supernode 1 for a number of reasons. From Supernode 3, even though we have a lot of bandwidth there, there's no exchange. We're really going to be stuck on a number of very small connections that are kind of difficult to consume. So Brooklyn is not really going to probably get much more bandwidth, which is unfortunate, even though it is a lot. And we also can't connect, being that it's in Brooklyn, it's good for fiber in Brooklyn, but it's not going to get us into the Bronx. It's not going to get us into Harlem or anywhere else. So we have to have something in Manhattan, and Brooklyn can be the other access point. Okay. Anyway, this makes it future-proof. It's safe because we can switch to different location within the same building. It's big enough. We can have multiple providers duke it out about which one wants to give us the right price fiber, right, which is nice. It's cost reducing because we don't have to have a new connection for every building we want to connect. We can have them all centralized in one location, okay? Yes, so what does it look like? So we're in this location right here where you can see, I mean, this is the actual picture where we are, not from some Wired magazine. So we're in this location here on the left-hand side. There's tons of fiber going overhead. We have this space right here. And yes, it's a really good building to be in. So far, from starting around in December up to February, there was a phase where they were building out the cabinet for us. We got dark fiber here in April. In May, we got 40 gigabits of internet from a donor pilot. As of June, this month, we have a 20 gigabit router deployed. Well, 20 is less than 40, yes, but we're working up to it, right? We're not going to consume it all in one day. We have, although it only has a 3 gigabit capability, so it's unfortunate we're a little bit bottlenecked, but we will be working on that. And in June, also this month, we switched Grand Street over to using this connection from this location to there. So all of the traffic in this area is being served via the dark fiber to 111 8th Avenue. In July, I'm hoping that we can get we can actually start exiting traffic locally to the internet from our new POP. We'll have 40 gigabit router sometime next month. I hope in the coming months, we'll have a 10 gig internet exchange connection, so it'll be really redundant and looking in the positive direction there, as well as moving our DKIX connection over and increasing the bandwidth as well.
Well, thank you, Zach, for that. I'm going to be talking a little bit more specifically about how we've alluded to specifically this building and how this plays into the fiber plans and how it plays into the rest of the network. Definitely a lot of people have asked, both on the Slack and a little bit of here, is what's happening with the rest of the wireless network. And don't worry, I'm going to answer that here. So don't worry, the wireless network isn't going away anytime soon. And so that's going to be very important for this. All right, so we're at Grand Street Guild. What is Grand Street Guild? It is basically an affordable housing project that we have partnered with back in 2019 to bring internet access to the residents of this building. So this is a pretty noble idea. Instead of we've sort of partnered with you might have seen on the Slack that we're partnering with NYCHA and we're partnering some with other private management companies to sort of put Wi-Fi access in buildings and courtyards. This is where that's originated from. This is the very first area where, hey, we can sort of provide a value add to residents in a building, in a large building like this. Back in 2019, we had started with the build out on the roof. Jason Howard here in the front is very familiar as he was part of that build out. So we were on the roof of this building, and not this building, but the two taller ones, because as you can see, this one's a little recessed, so we're taking advantage of the two tall buildings out of the three. And we have antennas there beaming from all over the East Village down to Sabi, which is the Supernode 1 connection where the internet has been coming from for the longest time, as well as large parts of Williamsburg and Greenpoint across the river. So this has been a really instrumental part of getting a lot of our Manhattan and Brooklyn nodes connected, especially once our Vernon hub went up, which is a NYCHA development. So, this is definitely, in terms of centrality to the current network as it stood, this is very much logically central. It is, if you look at a map, it's not necessarily the most central place. If you look at the most central place in our network, it's probably going to be somewhere in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. But in terms of like how many hops every person has to, wireless hops, every antenna has to get to, this is sort of in the central. This is pretty much everything is connected to everything, which is what makes it a really ideal to land fiber here. So in terms of what was our value add back then, so this partnership and the construction happened in 2019, I believe. So across here, we actually were putting Wi-Fi access points on the poles all around us. The light poles, we're putting mesh, ubiquity mesh APs on each of those light poles, which all connect and actually terminated right here in this very room. You can actually see the Ethernet cables running from behind Jolie, that coming from the window. If you see on the ground, you might see those two funky Ethernet cables. Well, that was holding up a lot of the wireless access points around here. And before fiber was even in the question, there was an antenna on this roof from a pole that looked something like that and pointed down to this location to get the internet down to the ground. So, that's a great solution, but then the expansion was actually getting the residents connected. Now, in terms of getting the residents connected, the main goal for that is trying to, how do you get the fastest connection possible, but also taking up the smallest space. Most of the install leaders, like I, had only been familiar with Ethernet at the time, which, for most Ethernet, it's kind of thick. It's like a ½ inch. And if you want to shove, like for 24 floors, if you want to shove, 24 cables down a really tiny pipe, you're going to have a bad time, as well as the need to carry power over that. The major difference between a fiber and Ethernet network in terms of a mass building deployment is that Ethernet, like copper, is going to need power at every splice. There's no way to passively splice it. You have to have a switch. So that means you have to start tapping power on each floor. That means you got to get an electrician, and that gets a little funny. In a lot of places it's possible that have pre-RAN Ethernets everywhere, but this building was constructed in the 1970s. There's no pre-RAN Ethernet, unfortunately. So we went with fiber. So just to tick off from where Zach left off in terms of where we're coming from the supernode, earlier this year we were able to have our fiber provider, Crown Castle, to come in and fish the fiber down from the manhole outside on Broome Street into just a room down the hall from here, which is super awesome. Maybe we'll do a tour. I don't know. But basically, you can see on the top right, the construction crews from Crown Castle are actually fishing the fiber through to the manhole into that room and then running that big spool of super armored cable right here. Now, it's a really big armored cable that contains lots of fiber, but we're actually only using 2 strands. 2 strands of fiber, unlike copper, can actually carry 100 gigabits if you put the right stuff at each end. We don't need that much right now, but that is the potential, and that is what Zach was explaining, that it really the fiber does not need to be upgraded. All you need to do is change the optics at each end to take advantage of whatever new technologies is available. So that is that really makes it easy to future-proof, and it makes the overhead of maintaining the fiber network really low. So that's some of my crummy handwriting describing, what are we doing, how are we going to put this into our rack. You can see the evolution of that. Those crummy handwriting turned into putting our equipment on the wall. So we were able to now have our Crown Castle termination box on the left, we have our own fiber box on the right, and we get to put our own equipment on the wall. So if some of you have been install leaders or have been on install with me or somebody else in the past, if you've been in the install team channel, you might have seen okay, you have an OmniTick router and you have a light beam and you have, they talk to each other. It's kind of like magic. In here, it's actually, it uses the same routing protocol as the rest of the network, OSPF. That means open shortest path first. Basically, there was some really cool mathematician in the 80s who decided to figure out, you can use Dijkstra's algorithm to figure out, hey, if you have a certain amount of interconnected nodes or spots that are all connected with wires, how do you mathematically calculate how they're closest to each other? This is using the same stuff, roundabout a way of saying that, which means that we can just put in a router here that can connect to the rest of the network, to the wireless network, without having to change anything. And this means that this is going to help our wireless network in the long term. We'll get to that at the end. You can see here there's some fiber terminations here. This is the OLT. That's called optical line terminal, and that's where the fiber actually goes into and splits out. Again, as I'm saying, then one of the nice things about fiber is that it's a completely passive thing. That means you can split it, you can not combine it, but you can split it infinitely without needing to put power in certain spots. Sometimes you will need repeaters if you split it too many times, but the idea is if you plan out your fiber network well, we can get it into a numerous amount, 600 apartments with just those 2 little boxes, which is pretty nice. Instead of having to use, a switch, Ethernet repeater, power on every single floor, there's 24 floors in each building, that would start to get really complicated really fast. So the benefit of a fiber network. So in terms of what we're doing here at Grand Street, the goal of this project is to bring, in terms of involvement of Grand Street, is to bring fiber to the home, fiber into the apartments, which is not something normally we do. Again, if you've been on install with us, you've seen that we normally bring Ethernet from the antennas into the apartment. From a standpoint, it's just easier to pull through the raceways and you don't need power. This is sort of a demonstration of how we actually work with it. So you can see Zach on the bottom left is in one of the trash chutes, that's like where the pipe goes from the basement of the building all the way to the roof. That is a place where we're tapping into that fiber and actually splitting it out into the apartments. That's a splitter. It comes from one fiber going down to the ground, and it goes into eight of those, if you can see those green little connectors, going in for the 8 apartments on that floor. So we're able to passively split it without needing any electricity in the trash room at all. Super nice. If you can see on the right, that's Rob Johnson, who's another Mesh volunteer. I took a picture of, we were splicing the fibers on the roof to connect it to our antennas, because we don't, we're selfish, we've got to take advantage and plug in our fiber to the roof as well, so then the whole rest of the wireless network can benefit as well. So that's what we're doing on the roof there. And in the top, we are training basically the youths, both residents and of Grand Street and of the neighborhood, start to learn some really marketable skills on how to splice fiber, how to work with fiber. So those two are some of the youths we were working with to basically learn basic fiber splicing and construction to do the installations into people's homes. So that's a good speed test. And that's coming from our interconnection at 111 8th Avenue at that supernode. So I think when I took that speed test, he had like a gaming computer plugged into our router, and we were able to do a speed test. Whoa, that's super fast, yay. But, that's always awesome. The people here have been super ecstatic because, the comparable price, if you get it from Verizon Files or something like that, is very expensive and is often very hard to achieve for a lot of the residents who happen to be on a fixed income, but they still need to be able to get into telehealth. They still need education. They still need entertainment. All of those services, they need it just as much as anyone else. They just, but to be able to support a nonprofit like this and not have to deal with spending on the overhead of all these other, benefit profit-making centers like the other ISPs think about, we're really just focused on making sure that the organization is fiscally covered despite our investments and to expand further. So, it's a great speed. That's, I think, is like 1 millisecond ping down to the interconnect, which is really nice. And it's probably, I've seen 0 sometimes. The only reason why it would fluctuate right now is because the way that we're using, not to get too technical, we are actually not even taking advantage of the entire 40 gigs down to the supernode yet. We're running at like 2 to 3 gigabits capacity just because we still need to fine tune the configurations. Zach is taking care of that and doing an amazing job because he knows all the terms that just go right over my head. But it is really cool to see this sort of evolve, and hopefully more of the Mesh volunteers will start to learn some of the jargon as well. So how does the rest of the network benefit? All the residents here, you have to get an apartment in Grand Street Guild to benefit from this, right? Well, actually, so in the wireless side, as you saw Rob splicing the fiber up to the roof, we are now injecting the super fast speed from the data center onto the roof as well. What this means is now, this is actually not here, this is at Vernon, this is in Bed-Stuy, about 4.92 kilometers away, and using an antenna, that's a 10 gigabit antenna that's supposed to come in the mail by the end of June, but is still not in the mail yet, we're able to take a big chunk, like a quarter of that bandwidth, and beam it right into the heart of Brooklyn. That's going to be huge for the network, because that means, even though Grand Street is in Manhattan, Vernon is a really tall building in Brooklyn, and now we can either through fiber, more likely wirelessly, beam that up to more parts of Queens, further up north in Long Island City, and etc. So that's the goal. We are now so Vernon is already able to take advantage of about 1 gigabit, 1.4 gigabits from Grand Street, but once we get the new antennas, we're going to be able to send 10 gigabits over there. So I'm personally really excited for that project because it means that we're able to expand out further east. You can see on the top right, the projector isn't really doing great for my graph, but you can see actually during a really heavy torrential rain, our Vernon to Supernode 3 link went out because if it's a high bandwidth 60 gigahertz, it doesn't do very well in rain. You could see it actually switched over to the Grand Street link as soon as the rain started to hit. And that meant that everyone could seamlessly, no one even noticed the switch, because as soon as basically we've configured those antennas to say, hey, the link speed is dropping below a certain amount, let's just switch over right away. Boom, now it's coming through Grand Street. I think my overall goal is to have it go through Grand Street all the time, because with the additional capacity that Grand Street has, it doesn't, we could set it up. It's very flexible how we set up either what can be the backup, what can be the primary link. It pretty much doesn't matter at that point. We can play with it as much as to our heart's content. So that's the benefit to the wireless side. So the rest of the mesh is not feeling left out. But again, it really goes to show the importance of how important it is to partner with buildings like this, because they're the ones who say, hey, you are able to provide a great service to our residents at an extremely low cost. Come right in. And this is sort of the value, not just the value out of mesh, but just how important these collaborations are in the future. And I know Brian, who's going to present after me, is going to discuss his plans to make those collaborations happen in the future.
Hi, I'm Brian. I've been with the Mesh for 8 years now, back when it had 0 installs. So I'm going to do a little status update. I used to do these at our meetups back a while ago. But I think it's 2.5 years since I've done a status update, so things have changed a bit. We're over twice the size we were 2 years ago. So yeah, the number of installs now is 1,186. Yeah, we're growing about 50% a year, which is pretty strong growth still. And the big things that have happened recently, obviously the Supernode here, and I call it a pop at 111/8. Also we're finally getting into Harlem. It's taken us a long time, and that photo there is Rob J with some volunteers up in Harlem. So we've got a bunch of installs up in Harlem, and we're trying to get a Supernode there as well. What keeps us going is your $20 a month donations. Occasionally we get some people saying, can I donate more? Someone's donating $80 a month, which is nice, for their home connection. Yeah, so it's $13,830 a month. So that's a considerable amount of money now, and it's more than paying our bills. And that's our bank account balance today. It's quite healthy at the moment, $306,800. So yeah, we've got to come up with plans on how to spend this money. And first I'll talk about the other thing that's happened here, that we're actually paying people now. It's a big change. It's a bit of a cultural challenge to mix volunteering with paying people. Jason was our bookkeeper here, was one of the first people we paid. We're paying him as a contractor per hour, and also at Grand Street, because it's such a huge project, you couldn't expect volunteers to install hundreds of apartments. So Daniel, Funda, Merck, Armani, Christian, and others have been working as contractors per hour, and we also got in outside contractors, 700 Nano, to do the riser cables, which involved core drilling. So they had to drill through the concrete in each floor, and yeah. So this has been a big cultural shift. We're still working out how to do this. So there's a big a lot of tension the other day. Like how do you supervise people when we don't really have a hierarchy, and we're all decentralized. But as soon as you have someone supervising someone else, you introduce hierarchy, and so yeah, we've got to figure out how to do that. We're still talking about that. So yeah, what to do with our $300,000 we've got? Full building installs. Yeah, we started out, nearly all of our early installs are one apartment in a building, and someone would ask us to install, and that's all we would do. So we've got this. There's maybe 400 buildings where we've only got one apartment, which is it's so difficult to do one apartment, and it's just a waste, really. And we've never done the outreach to get the full building. So this is it has been changing recently. I've seen a lot more, at least partial building installs, where we do 5 or 10 apartments in a building. So it has been changing, which is great. I guess as we've been getting more established, people have heard of us, so it's easier to get people convinced to install. So yeah, full buildings is the fastest way to help the most people. So it's what the direction I think we should really be going. And there's a way to target buildings. Leaflets work really well, just putting them up. We've done that once and it worked really, really well. And you can do postcard mailouts. There's like, the post office does it for you. It's just a 2-block radius. It's I think it's the last 4 digits of your postcode, and so you can focus on just like 2 blocks anywhere in the city. So we can do postcard mailouts like that, pretty easy. And yeah, we need to target the buildings we're already in. There's this crazy waste of resources. We stick an antenna on an amazing building, and we do the multi-points to buildings all around it, but then we don't do the apartments inside the building. So we've got great connections at Vernon, but we're not connecting the apartments there. And it just so happened that Rob J and Daniel and I were all at Vernon the other day, and we just noticed how easy it would be to connect the apartments there. We don't have to drill or anything. The raceways are already there. So we're going to do it. We're just going to go ahead and do the apartments at Vernon. But we've got a whole series of these buildings. Saratoga, 7th Street Hub, it's in Alphabet City. It's already pre-wired with Ethernet. All we got to do is put in a few switches. It's a couple of days' work to do 200 apartments there. So yeah, we should do that. Henry Street's one of our oldest hubs, and we connected 1 apartment there. Avenue A, 100 Avenue A, and 0 apartments. So there's some big list of buildings we can do. Yeah, this is Vernon there. It's about two years ago. No, more like 3 or 4 years ago. I was just looking at a map of Brooklyn, and I figured out that this was the best rooftop in Brooklyn for us to get, and we ended up getting it, which it's an amazing rooftop. And yeah, now we should work on connecting all the apartments in. It's in Sumner Houses, which is a fairly notorious NYCHA group of buildings. It's a lot of shootings and things. Yeah, but it's 2,000 apartments in Sumner Houses. So once we start doing the apartments there, we can beam to all the other buildings, and that's 2,000 apartments. So let's do it. This a theme of these presentations is I want people to say what the mesh means to each person as they do the presentation, because everyone has a different idea of what the mesh means. And I made this list way back at the beginning because everyone would ask us, why are you doing this? And this was basically every reason I could come up with for doing it. So the 12 reasons. Well, I won't read that out, but it's on the website if you want to search for it. But over the years, what has really occurred to me is that what we're doing, we're doing this decentralized way of organizing things, which I think is really important. And I don't think this project would have worked in a hierarchical way. It just wouldn't have worked at all. And I think the mesh proves that, decentralized organizing works. And you can do huge projects this way as long as the goal is very focused. We're just making a community network. That's our goal. So, and I've always hoped that decentralized organizing, could be used for other things. When I got involved with the mesh, I was thinking, oh, will I do this or will I do healthcare? I was going to do decentralized healthcare. So, but I think that things like that are possible. You can do amazing things by decentralized organizing. And what direction would I like the mesh to take? It has completely changed us being here, because this project is maybe 20 times bigger than anything we've done before. It's a completely different scale. And we can do it now. We know how to do huge projects. So yeah, now we know how to do it. We can go to Vernon and do it. And there's 3.5 million apartments in New York City, so we've got a lot of work to do. And what we're building is a internet infrastructure as a community commons, which is an old idea. You still have you have that a little bit in Manhattan with the community gardens. The people share this common area. But originally, commons were for grazing your sheep or something. It would be in the center of the town. You could take your sheep there to graze. But yeah, and we're bringing back this old-fashioned idea of creating a commons and doing it with the internet.
We're an all-volunteer endeavor, right? So if you go looking on the website and in documents that you'll find various mission statements from over the years, and some of the common themes that are in all of these sort of if someone asks you, what is NYC Mesh, right? Here's something that I think is kind of accurate. We're volunteer-driven, charitable organization, so a nonprofit, 501c3, which is recent, I think, since 2019 or 20, right? With the goal of creating an open, resilient, and net neutral, community-owned and managed network, right? And it's accessible and affordable to all New Yorkers. So we kind of went through and emboldened some of these terms because this talk is about volunteering, so volunteer-driven is a key component here, right? And we own and manage our own network, so that kind of ties into all the volunteer tasks that lead into that goal, right? And this other notion that our mission is to make internet accessible to New Yorkers. In this presentation, I think we're gonna kind of see where we started as NYC Mesh, as a few nodes of people talking about sharing internet and making it happen, and then getting neighbors and getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And to the point where we're a sizable organization and we're doing a huge install, like the fiber install in this building, right? Now we are reaching people with our accessibility and our affordability that we're reaching them in a different way than those 3 or 4 people who connected to a hotspot in a bar back in 2013 or whatever it was, right? So let's see where we'll go from here. For those of you who are new to Mesh, here's a nice graphic that a volunteer probably made, right? And it kind of shows the basic configuration where you have the OmniTick, which can cast a signal in every direction, omnidirectionally, and the light beam, which is a point to multi-point. It can point at a sector that's casting its signal out to lots of light beams, right? And it can catch that signal and bring it down on an Ethernet cable into the apartment to an indoor router. Someone's using Wi-Fi in their house, their laptop, and their other devices. And that OmniTick is casting a signal to the OmniTick 2 doors down and 3 doors in the other direction, right? You can reach about 2 blocks, 3 blocks pretty well, even farther, but for the best signal, it's got to be pretty close. But as you can see, the more of these we have, the more meshy it gets, right? So this is the basic idea. And then this can be extended to block association in Bed-Stuy, Crown Heights. Where's Jefferson Street? Bed-Stuy, where many neighbors connect to the mesh, having that set up on a number of rooftops. And in fact, you see Saratoga Village, the sector is casting the signal out, and at least 3 light beams are catching that signal and giving it to 4 more OmniTicks, right? So we have at least 7 houses in this picture, I think, if I counted correctly. And that's also an interesting thing as we scale. Just as a side note, we have 3 ways out of this meshlet, right? We have found the hard way that if we only have 1 way out of the meshlet, this is not a good situation. So this means that community is important, right? The layers upon this. Not only does everybody have their gear and they're connected, but they're also interrelating with their neighbors, right? These people, their first names are on their rooftops, right? They probably know each other on a first name basis now. And if Chirag trips over the PoE, the power over Ethernet, and unplugs the gear, now Anton is going to have to go visit Chirag or call them up, right? So again, community owned, that's the notion of community that is what makes Mesh special, right? You don't know anyone next door that has Spectrum usually because everybody has their own deal, but the model of Mesh is that we get to know each other, and that's the way it works the best. Nice picture of the first happy member on the Jefferson block. And then here's a timeline that I pulled from some proposals over the years, and then I added some updated it a little bit, and then Rob and I went through last night and emboldened some key things from each year just to like bring focus, right? Because it's a lot of words. And this will all be online, so you can look at it later. But 2004 is when it all started, right? First node. I'm sorry, 2014, correct. Thank you. ISOC New York grant, we were talking about Jolly being involved in getting us that first influx of money. That's a big deal, right? Because then it enables in 2016 a supernode. And what is a supernode? Zach talked about it last month, but it requires paying parties for data space and rack space and roof space and peering arrangements, right? And hardware, right? So having that money enabled us to do this. And meanwhile, more nodes are happening. We're documenting our stuff better. We're getting more grants. We're getting a legitimate internet address, right? And then we start doing that thing in the picture with the OmniTicks and the light beams, small hubs, right? We start replicating that all over neighborhoods, and we're hitting probably I might not have the history exactly right, but I would imagine if you start in the East Village, now you can reach Chinatown, you can reach Stuyvesant Town or whatever. The big thing in 2018 that jumped out at me was OmniTicks, because that's normal to me, because when I joined, that's what was suggested to get. But previous to 2018, we were trying all different sorts of configurations, right? Maybe nano beams or power beams, or I don't know what other hardware, maybe not even Ubiquity hardware or MikroTik hardware. But once we figured out a model and an automatic configuration for the OmniTicks, now we have more and more OmniTicks, and next year we open up Supernode 3 in South Brooklyn with a 40 gigabit per second connection, where Supernode 1 only had 1, and we had a Supernode 2 and a Supernode 4, but they got closed. So Supernode 3 is a big deal, right? Fast connection, and a lot of places can reach it. then COVID happens in 2020, and a crazy thing happens where installs cease for a while, right? Everybody has to stay home. And meanwhile, we're getting our 501c3 status. But then all of a sudden, I guess in the fall of 2020, and that's when I sort of became aware of NYC Mesh, installs requests start picking up again, right? Because what happened, pandemic made us stay home and work from home, and people need a good internet option at home. And there was more press coverage probably. I found out about it, I think, on Nextdoor or one of those neighborhood lists, right? Where someone was saying, what do I do? Spectrum sucks. And someone says, oh, try NYC Mesh. And I'm thinking, well, I have Fios in my house. I don't need NYC Mesh. But then I checked it out, and look at me now. I got sucked in. So 2021, Vernon Hub. What is that? We responded to a request for expressions of interest, which is like an RFP, an RFEI, where the city said, hey, who can give cheap internet access or accessible internet access to these public housing developments? And we were given permission to do Vernon and a couple more housing developments, and we pulled it off in 2021. And that's when I joined, and I got to help a little bit with that, so that was really great. And that's when I met Rob, right? So Rob, my absent co-presenter. And bring us to today, and here we are in Grand Street Guild, where we have accomplished a fiber to the home project, and we're learning, we're learning lessons, and we're refining our methods, and we're making it happen, right? So the people in this housing complex can get a fiber connection for $10 a month when they join NYC Mesh. So there's our timeline. There's Daniel. He just left before his. But this is a big deal. 2021, we had a large layout article in the New York Times, right? And I think that brought a lot of attention. And then to sum up again at NYC Mesh in 2022, now we have 3 supernodes because we opened up supernode 10 in the Google data center. We're now for making forays into fiber into the home. We have expanded farther into Harlem. We're looking at South Bronx, and we're getting our projects going in Brownsville also, Crown Heights. And we've also started a new way to cast fast, create fast point-to-point links using 60 gigahertz. And for technical reasons, you don't want everything to be 60 gigahertz, but when we diversify our connections, this is great. But this is to say that volunteers are thinking about all these things and making stuff happen. And quickly, for the people who are new to Mesh, or just to take a look at this and think about it, this is a pretty current depiction of our map. And you see we're heavy in central Brooklyn. We got a lot of people in South Brooklyn around Supernode 3, but we're not very deep down into Sunset Park or Bay Ridge yet, into South Brooklyn. And we're really heavy where we're standing right now, but there's big buildings and stuff in the way. We're not in Manhattan very much, but we've got a cluster going on in Harlem, and we're going over to the Bronx. So that's our map. And then what's cool about our map, if you go to nycmesh.net/map, you can turn things on and off in the layers. And I think it's really cool to see our supernodes. And these purple lines are virtual private networks, VPNs, where people can join the network but not actually be physically on the network. So Supernode 1 and Supernode 3 connect through the internet, but they stay within the mesh because of VPN technology. And then you see the yellow line is our fiber under the street that connects here to 111 8th Avenue, the data center. There's Rob. He couldn't make it today, so that's him on a 22-foot ladder, aiming equipment at, this is the east mast, I think. This might be the west mast. This might be going to PH. No, there's the GVE. This is going to Saratoga, I think. And then, like I said, on our map, you can turn on and off layers. So here's the medium-sized hubs, where they are in the neighborhoods with sectors pointing in every direction, and people can connect to them with their small hubs, which are the Light Beam and the OmniTix. So here's our small hubs. So that's everybody's individual connection. And then if you off all the layers and you turn on potential, this is all the people who at one time said, hey, can I connect? And for whatever reason at that time, either they stopped inquiring or they can't connect yet, right? So when we go in a certain direction, we'll try to look at these gray dots and contact those people, reply to the email and say, hey, are you still interested? Because there's a hub now and you could connect. So sometimes we get people to connect that way. And here's the stats graph. You can reach it at nycmesh.net/stats. And you can see it, we're at 1,160 active nodes. And an active node, I believe, is a rooftop. So that could have many families underneath it, right? Starting with 2 in 2015 and ending with 1,100. It's a hyperbola. It's not linear. It looks a little linear, but it's swift advancement, right? Okay. So back to volunteering. How are we pulling this off? How is Mesh growing? Well, we see that our number of nodes is increasing substantially. We could say exponentially, but I don't think it's quite. We're now starting to accomplish, and also to court more multiple installs inside a whole building. And of course, it's better if that building is not yet constructed, because then we can ask them to put conduits for us. But it also includes apartment buildings where 10 residents want to hook up, and then we have to figure out how to get them connected, right, physically. Our budget has grown by orders of magnitude. So I remember we said, I forget what year, a few years in, OmniTix was a big thing. And Rob was saying that OmniTix were twice as expensive as the previous technology. So people were like, we can't do that. It's too extravagant. We'll run out of money, right? And now we're just like, here, put Omnis everywhere, and hopefully the supply chain will last our demand. But we're in a different place, right? And the place that we're in now is that if there's a big job that, like coring through these 26-story towers, we can hire a subcontractor to do it. We could do it with volunteers and teach people to run a core drill, but why not just have the data contractor with the conduits up? And we also have some paid employees. So what used to be done only by volunteers, like to go to individual apartments and hook up their connection, we have an equivalent of one full-time employee, I believe, spread among 2 or 3 people, and they're getting this done. We also have interns. There's summer youth employment folks, so young people who are spending the summer helping Mesh and getting paid to do it by the city. And good news, recent news, is that we applied to AmeriCorps Vista program. AmeriCorps is like the Peace Corps, but domestically here in the United States, and the Vistas are supported volunteers full-time for at least a year and possibly 2 or 3 years, right? So this is a big deal. We have basically 5 full-time volunteers that we can hire, and they'll get paid, some kind of subsistence stipend by US government to help us. We have partnerships with big agencies like the city, NYCHA, HPD, community organizations like Fifth Avenue Committee, et cetera. We're doing a lot of grant applications. We're actually going out and pursuing donors. Some donors are pursuing us and dropping money in our laps. So I think it's the Sterling Family Foundation. When Mayor Adams cut off the, put the whole New York City broadband program on hold, where we were going to do these big projects in the Bronx, Crown Heights, and Brownsville, this foundation just shoveled money at us and said, we want you to keep going. City's not giving you money, keep going. And yeah, making allies in the communities as well, community boards, business improvement districts. All of this takes volunteer labor, right? We don't have any paid staff sitting in an office doing this. We're all doing it after 9 p.m. or on our lunch break or whatever. We're doing it, everyone's pitching in, and somehow we're getting this done, and it's brought us to where we are. In the spring, we started using contractors for the first time on a large scale, and we have a handful of people who are dedicated to installing and supporting members. And this summer, we have I already mentioned this, the Summer Youth Employment Program folks, and we're gonna get the 5 vistas. And the thing that we need more volunteers to do is the leadership to accomplish this stuff, right? So as we have more and more volunteer tasks that help us get more and more stuff done, we're seeing more and more the need for leadership to step up. This is an actual question that I believe it was the city asked, the EDC, the funding arm of the city, which has been put on hold from funding us, but they were asking us, well, how do you support your users? Like, how is it done? And it's done with volunteers, right? So since the beginning of the Mesh, this is how we've done it. We've helped each other, we've learned from each other, we've done experimentation, explored with each other, and using our connections to each other, we've been able to support the Mesh. We must educate each other, we must enable each other, we must empower each other. This won't work if some of us think others are not able to learn this stuff, right? We have to make it accessible to everyone's comfort level or ability. So even if someone goes to the support channel and says, I know nothing about computers, but my internet doesn't work. If we're doing our job right, hopefully at the end of that, if their mind is open and the person's helping them have an open mind, some knowledge will be exchanged, even if it's a small amount of knowledge. And maybe it's a large amount of knowledge, and then that person becomes a support person as well. And I think the way we've been thinking about NYC Mesh is the way it's going to survive is we have to support each other. So the idea is, okay, if we expand into neighborhood Y, we got to find people in that neighborhood who are interested in being active volunteers, teach them everything they need to know, and support them when they have questions, and they will support their neighborhoods. And to some degree, this works, right? But what if we tomorrow, a big real estate developer says, there's a new law in New York City that we have to provide broadband access in all of our new construction, so you're it. Put mesh in all the new construction. We got 500 apartments here, we got 270 apartments over there, and we're in the Bronx and Bath Beach and Staten Island. With our current core of volunteers, how are we going to support that? So this is where we have to start envisioning with these growing, these leaps and bounds that we're making as we grow, how are we going to do this? How can we increase our capacity to support members?